And Spotify on my laptop isn't cooperating, so I'm just going to have to use the Spotify on my cell phone. Wonders of technology, eh? Speaking of technology...
The trolls are out tonight. We'll raise hell again tonight.
Ones and Zeros Volume 0 by 3RDegree. So 3RDegree is a New Jersey progressive rock band, and actually I was introduced to these guys before I even kind of knew it. I heard their single It Works from the Narrowcaster album that they put out back in like 2008. So this was like coming into my really deep dive into progressive rock music. So about 2 to 3 months ago, they reached out to me saying, hey, we released our follow-up to our Ones and Zeros album Volume 1 with Ones and Zeros Volume 0. I really deep delve into these volumes, and I listened to Volume 0 first and then listened to Volume 1. Right off the get-go, I am going to say that Volume 1 is the weaker of the two, so that's more of a nod and a compliment to Volume 0. Volume 1 being more of like a concept album and like our relationship with machines. Volume 0 does deal with similar ideas and similar concepts, but it never really, at least in my mind with me listening to the album, it doesn't have like that clear narrative style. Like it does deal with the same kind of ideas of our relationships with technology, and especially with like our fulfillment in these basic needs of life being taken away from the organic form and being put on these ones and zeros. And that's another theme that does come up in the album of Volume 0 quite a bit, is this breaking everything down into a binary code, and can we distill human life into that kind of a structure. So I like that they decided to play a little bit around with this kind of a concept of a binary code, taking over some of the more subtle, some of the more complex, and some of the more subdued items as well. And so that's kind of the concept of the overall album. I don't know if it kind of fits the exact same narrative flow as Volume 1 did, and the lyrical content on here also helps to elevate that concept by using fun and updated terms for this digital era. Like on the second song on this album of Connecting, where they're continuously saying that the trolls are out tonight, being those not necessarily the cave-dwelling, well, I guess in some ways cave-dwelling, but those mythical trolls, more of the online trolls, also stating that this woman is the automatron, but she's not mine, I'm her human being, type of a thing. Again, having that relationship between this technology, saying like this entity, this artificial intelligence, I don't own it. In fact, if anything, it owns me. And I like that kind of that switch, which is very relevant nowadays. There's a few moments on this album that it does get a little bit muddled. The one in particular is the perfect baby, saying like now we can engineer our own children into such an extent where, you know, all the flaws from the one parent can be eradicated. We leave nothing to chance. And I feel like having this particular song in terms of the lyrical content on this album is a little bit of it muddles the concept a little bit. I didn't quite know what they were trying to get at. Like for the most part, they were saying how artificial intelligence is supplementing our real life, but are these perfect babies, are they the next step in our like biological evolution, or are we now programming these artificial intelligences to have children, almost like a Blade Runner kind of a feel, like this replicant having children? And again, I think it muddles the water a little bit in that sense. I think they probably should have just left it as creating children in a more of a artificial intelligence way, instead of creating children in an artificial environment. But let's talk about the real thing here, and that is the music. And the music on this album is stand out and very, very well done. This is definitely the highlight of the entire album. And I mean, when this is the highlight, when I've already talked about the concept and the lyrical content, then we're dealing with something very special here. The first 3 songs on here, Reinstall, Connecting, and Olympia, all flow together very seamlessly, almost creating one track, and I'm not quite sure why they decided to divide these tracks up, but it provides a really great kind of ebb and flow. I love how they kind of build into one another, and how each one provides the perfect stepping stone to the next individual. I particularly love the groove section that we have within Olympia. I love that high guitar sound, and the harmonizations definitely are the key thing to hear. I think this is a very strong thing, and something that prog hasn't really been capturing all that much since the retro prog kind of gave it up for a darker feel. This feels something from, say, Moon Safari that I've been really craving since Moon Safari's been on a longer hiatus. I also particularly love the tasty hook that we had from The Future Doesn't Need You, where they're saying, the future doesn't really need you, future doesn't really need, the future doesn't really need you now. And it's overlaid on top of one another. It feels almost very like Queen-esque in that sense. And I wish they kind of created a complete round within this, where one starts another, and almost had a you know, like the Neil Morris or Spock's Beard or even a Flower Kings round that we desperately need as a prog community. And I also love like the fun aspect that the guys bring, especially with Unintentional Consequence. And what I enjoy is they bring a heavier aspect to this song without compromising that fun. They bring in more of a heavy guitar, but it's got that finger picking, but they have that oomph, oomph, oomph. And mentioning back to Perfect Babies, even though it does muddy the water a little bit within the concept, I do love the musical presentation on here because it presents the theme within the chorus, but it presents it twice. It's almost like you're on a roller coaster and it goes around the track once, and then when it goes around the second time, you expect it to follow the same suit, but then it changes direction and you're going in a completely different direction. And I love that kind of bait and switch that we had, because first, I was really expecting to go through that loop again because of how great the music was, but then the switch that we had is even better presentation because it takes a little bit of a minor turn instead of going into the major chord. Just having that expectation and then having that divide of it was such a great little tinge. Now, I will also mention the spoken word aspect from a child. It's met with a little bit of a full stop, and I do enjoy that it is the bridge, pun intended, for the songs of Perfect Babies and Logical Conclusion, but I feel like they could have really hammered home the idea of this divide between man being the bridge between Beast and Uberman. And I felt like instead of saying the Uberman, they could have said the divine, and I think that would have hammered the concept home a little bit more between what is the difference between a machine and a human. And they do kind of bring that a little bit, but again, it gets muddled a little bit. Now, of course, I have to talk about Click Away. Click Away being the Goliath track on here, just over 15 minutes, and it is a treat. It is beautiful. I love the ebb and flow on this. I love how it changes from one movement to another. It is all done seamlessly. Each movement builds upon the last to make just a beautiful, like, logical conclusion. It's a great divide. Now, there is a moment within the middle to last section that feels very much like something from the Voyage of the Acolyte from Steve Hackett, and it almost feels directly stolen. It's reused quite a bit, and I feel like they used it a little too much. I think they could have shaved that part down just a little bit to really get us into that climax of the song that we're really waiting for. And finally, the album ends with Ones and Zeros, a great way to end this, to kind of push us into Volume 1, being that this is a semi-prequel to Volume 1, but really saying, you know, ones and zeros, what does separate us between the machines? What does it mean to be human? Which is a big concept within Volume 1, and it provides a great play out. And most of the times I don't like when an album fades out, but this play out fade out does it very well, because once it gets to that point, it's just kind of like the closing of the doors and provides almost an interlude intermission for us then to go right into Volume 1. So overall, I've been loving this album. This is by far 3rd Degree's best album I've heard. Granted, I've only heard Narrowcaster as well as Volume 1, but in my mind, this is probably their best work. I will be going back and listening to all their other past works, because if this is what the band is capable of, I'm excited to dive into the rest of their discography. This is one that I highly recommend you going to find out, and I've got to say, I love this album with my whole heart. I would be very surprised if this doesn't end up in my top 5 of the year, and that's saying something considering this summer has held some real bangers. So that's about it from me for Ones and Zeros Volume 0 by 3rd Degree. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? It's been out for quite a while, so let me know of your own thoughts about this album by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.